Hello, guys. David Vos again. What a beautiful day. It rained yesterday pretty good. It's a little sunny out right now, and we're just enjoying this beautiful morning, but it's going to start raining here pretty quick again. Oh, I just love these summers around here with these monsoon rains. And, these monsoon rains, I remember Utah had them. Colorado kind of has it, and Arizona, all this area. But the monsoon rains that we have are so beautiful. They're better than the ones up in Utah, which only last, and they're sporadic, and in the summertime you get a little rain and that kind of thing, and they call it the monsoon. But what I like about it here is the perfection of where I am at in the Rocky Mountains. I'm far enough south that I'm warmer than up there in Utah. We don't have those harsh winters. And then you'd think, well, then it's further south. We're really hot here. But because we're in the mountains, I'm at 7,500 feet where I live in the mountains. It doesn't get very hot in the summer, really. Only 80 or so. And only for about a month. And then these monsoon rains come. And they just last for about 3 months straight. We have a little rain every day. Once in a while, it might not rain, but it for about 3 months rains. And then there's, even in the spring, it rains off and on, and in the fall. So we get a lot of nice weather in the summer. Beautiful. And even the winters are so mild that you could be standing in January with no snow and it'd be 60 degrees. It's perfect. It's just beautiful weather most of the time. I've counted it up, and if you took all the bad weather that we have here, the weather I don't like, either it's too hot or it's too cold or something, it's probably only about a 3-month period out of the whole year. So about 9 months out of the year, it's just perfect around here. Anyway, I hope you're having a wonderful day. I hope you're enjoying the weather where you are. Guys, today I want to take you through specific things, because we got to get specific. I want to prove to you, and that's hard to do because, like the video that we did yesterday, I didn't have time to go through the entire Bible to show you that every verse in Psalms, Isaiah, Jeremiah, and all these, Ezekiel, Book of Revelation, how it ties in, things that Jesus said. It would take a month of Sundays and another, well, that's not very long, a month of Sundays. It would take a lot longer than that to go through all of the scriptures. Now, of course, we do end up doing that over a period of years, but you'd have to watch all my videos. But to be able to capture all of this in 1 or 2 videos, to prove to the listener that what I'm telling is the absolute truth, is not easy to do. So I have to use the art of teaching, I guess, to throw in the facts, which are boring sometimes, just reading monotone information, data, looking at a dictionary, and at the same time, and reading verses. People don't want me to sit here and read the Bible. Oh, he's going to read some portion of the Bible again today. What people like is for somebody to weave a story and to colorfully talk about all of this and get to some deep philosophical ideas and thoughts and throw some humor in. So it takes a bit of work. And I wasn't even that good at that when I first started. I hope I'm getting better at it. But today I'm like spinning because I have these facts I want to tell you. I want to share the verses with you. Well, we ain't got time. And I've got to determine what would be the quickest path to point B here from point A, and which would be the most entertaining to keep you interested so you don't click off, and at the same time the most informative while being entertained, that reveals and enlightens the mind so that one can even grasp what I'm saying. Or so therefore we have to ask why a lot. And not just, well, here's the facts, but here's why. And sometimes I try to tell you how I came to that conclusion, how the revelation unveiled. Because I think we're all kind of the same. We're all just sitting around here trying to figure out what's going on. But I'll guarantee you this. I have discovered something, and I hope you'll be able to see that as we go along. I think some of you may have already noticed it. That I, for years, had some real questions. Honest and true and deep. In other words, if you don't know where to begin, you're never going to get to the answer on any of this. I guarantee you, you're not going to figure this out. And it was by a series of fortunate occurrences that I got to this point. One could look at it that way. Just a series of fortunate occurrences that got me to a place where I could understand this. But I can't say it was completely that. I mean, I personally willed to do it. I personally decided I was going to find the truth. That had to come first. And that's got to be the same for all of you. If you've got a preconceived idea and you don't really want to let go of that one, you're never going to get to the truth. And if you have a preconceived idea and you really believe it's true because you've got, I think I was telling you guys the other day, some people have like 20% of the Bible that they understand. And they can harmonize that 20% pretty well. And that will lead them to some kind of conclusion that when they hear the other side of the argument that is using another 20% of the biblical scriptures that they don't use, and they've got them harmonized in another way, then they just reject that side, not knowing about those other 20%. They don't want to even think about it. Sometimes somebody will bring up a verse that contradicts what they're thinking, and they're like, well, no, that doesn't fit with what I believe, and I've got this 20% of what I believe that makes sense. And I think that's how people end up going towards the law, because 20% of the Bible does look like the verses kind of teach that you got to go back to the law and get salvation through works. And therefore, let's gravitate to the Torah. And it makes, like I said, it comforts people to keep the Sabbath and stuff because they think, well, I'm doing this wonderful thing. I'm keeping laws and I'm a good person and I can prove it. It's like math. But philosophically, it makes no sense because we're all in the same boat. A friend of my best friend has always told me that we're all in the same boat. And that's true. We're all in the same boat trying to paddle upstream, and here comes the falls. And we're not making a lot of progress. We're all going downstream in a hurry. And the best thing to do is not to panic. And another thing you don't want to do is when you're in that boat going downstream the wrong way, is to just be stubborn. You know, sometimes the wife says, honey, why don't you start the motor and let's get out of here? And you're like, don't bother me with all the facts. I'm too busy rowing to try and save us here. Be quiet. I ain't got time for this. But, you know, there are ways, just be calm. There are ways to get out of the situation. But it really takes a lot of wisdom. And wisdom takes time. And you've got to be willing to let go of your favorite ideas. And if you find that there are arguments that contradict what you believe, instead of just throwing those out and trying not to think about it and saying, look, let's just concentrate on what I do know. And then you end up sticking to what you know and never really allowing those other ideas to come in and either persuade you that whatever it is that you're believing is not true, that you were misled, that you're misunderstanding something. So this is a process that is a real process that people need to go through. But it isn't the entire process. Like we said the other day, you got to have humility, because if you're stubborn, you're not going to get it. An angry person who's angry and mad, frustrated, who's got a hammer in his hand, trying to build something, he can get so angry that, like a spoiled, rotten child, they'll throw a tantrum and they'll just destroy it all. I knew a man, and I'm not going to say who, we were trying to do something and build something, and he was frustrated and getting really angry, and he had a hammer in his hand, and he finally just lost it and beat what he was building, and pulverized it and destroyed it. And it cost him like about $1,500 for that little outburst. And, he was a good guy, but yeah, he was prone to, this kind of outburst. And a lot of us don't realize it, but this is the way we are. We're like children. We're angry. We can't find the truth or figure it all out. So sometimes we just get mad and we don't want to know. We're going to go eat worms. We're just tired of this and go off and die. We don't have the courage or the integrity, or whatever word I'm looking for, the maturity to be calm and to stop and to accept reality and realize that whatever the truth is, it isn't what Christianity's been peddling for the last, I don't know how many years. They've been infiltrated by the enemy. They have truth, yes, but it's a little childish sometimes. It's like, oh, Jesus loves me, this I know. Well, that's great. And yes, I do love Jesus, and Jesus loves me. But there's so much more. And if we really want to get to a solution that evidently for thousands of years no man has ever come to the solution, and the only time anybody ever did come to the solution is when they went out and told the world the solution, and the world said, no, you fool, and murdered them. I mean, Jesus had the solution, but the solution was love. And nobody wanted that, because they're like, no, come on now. We want vengeance. We're sick and tired of the enemy. We're going to go kill him. You're either for us or you're against us, Jesus. And Jesus is like, well, listen, if you go out and kill him, then it's an eye for an eye. We've been doing this over and over again. And maybe your enemy, your brother that you think is your enemy, really is confused. Maybe they don't mean to harm you. Maybe that there's a better way. Maybe we could do it with love. Maybe with forgiveness. And the world's like, nah, we're not going to do that, right? We're going to take over the kingdom. The problem is that anger and that upsetness and that belief system that they had, that they thought would works only for a period of time until you get into power, and then you become the ogre, and then you start persecuting the other people. Because until you can, within yourself, get the victory over this vengeance and anger, it's great that you see the justice in murdering the bad guy. But what it isn't great is that you don't see the reality that the bad guy is also in you. So that's why Jesus said, before you go and try to take the splinter out of somebody's eye, make sure you get the beam out of your own eye. And so this has been the problem. It's really, once you get back and look at that little scenario, you realize that was the problem. And even though people know that's the problem when they're reading that parable, they can't seem to pull that parable into their reality, into the politics of the world, they're still voting for Trump. I know it sounds like the best way. Let's vote for Trump. At least he's going to make America great again, right? Give all the bad guys and kill them. But what about the kill them part? Are they really the enemy? Are the Iranian people really first of all, do you want to make America great again if it's the America that is run by the enemy, Silicon Valley and the AI? Is he just, do you think Trump's going to allow the AI to take over the world? Yeah. So once he makes America great by getting rid of all the other people and we have supreme power, don't you think he's just going to enslave you with AI? He already did. He's already the father of the thingy, and that didn't bother you one bit. So you're not getting the picture here. Something dramatic has got to happen. We've got to have a revolution, but not a revolution with arms. We need to have a revolution of thought. And the biggest problem with all of this is we don't know which way is up and which way is down, what is the truth and what is the false. We don't know our history. They have got us coming and going, and that's where we come in. We're going to have to sit down here, be calm, and with absolute determination, find the answer. But you won't even do that if you don't have faith already that there is an answer. And that it's not the same old answer that's been regurgitated a million times by the revolutionists. Now I'm going to take you back today, and I'm just going to, with my own words, try to make sense of all of this. I'm going to give you an understanding of history, throwing in some facts and data as we go, but so that you can understand what's really gone wrong. There is an opposing side. You don't realize it, but you've got a little group here. And we're all huddled together trying to make a solution. But what you don't know is they're infiltrators within the group. And they're egging people on. And they're trying to make you believe that we're all evil. So that you'll say, look, there's too much evil, Dave. We're going to have to kill them. But you see, there's not that much evil. This evil nature only is here because of a false understanding, because of a lie, and because of deception that's being planted. The enemy planted the weeds. We planted a garden. We've got a beautiful garden, and all of a sudden, all these weeds come up. And the disciples are like, well, what's going on here? And Jesus said, well, the enemy planted them. So then they're like, well, let's go kill them all. And Jesus said, no, that doesn't work. Because we don't know who the good guys are and the bad guys, because all of us have this wickedness. And those amongst us that are doing the evil are patsies for a very evil thing that we're going to identify. And if we identify that, then we can get rid of that. And then our brothers won't have this idea, this false idea. They won't all be deceived. And of course, some of it's going to be a matter of, well, it's like if you've got a group of children and they're immature and all they want is candy. And so when you're having an argument is what we're going to buy at the store, and you got a bunch of kids and mom is the only arbitrator, and mom gives up and lets the kids take over, then you go to the store and all you do is get candy. So in some situations, you've got to have a level truth acting mind, a disciplinary mind who says, now listen, hold on here. Candy's not good for you. I'm mama and I'm the boss. So in this situation, we're going to have to go by the facts, which is mama, the wisdom. We're going to have to go by the truth. We're going to have integrity. We're going to have to preserve all this. Yeah, justice, but what is justice without love? This is going to be an intricate process. And I think I've explained how I'm going to do this long enough now. Let me just get into this. We got to go back to the source. What's been going on in the world and why we can't seem to make a lot of ground here. I'm going to just tell you right off the bat what the problem is. There's an evil force in the world that is not something that would normally be here, but it's contrived. Now, it got contrived for a reason, because we were young and immature. And it is a process, because children have to grow up and the world has to grow up. We have to advance. So when we were young, we were under a schoolmaster that led to Christ. We're in a stage right now where we no longer should be under the schoolmaster. And it's the schoolmaster itself that's been turned and twisted into something other than a schoolmaster. And there is a philosophy that we're under right now. This is the city that has a kingdom over the kings of the earth. And that city is a covenant to Yahweh and this law. And if we can get rid of the law and the accusations and the hate and the vengeance, then we will be able to accept and receive the Christ. So this is true. If you look at the Bible and the New Testament, you see the two opposing sides. We've got the Jewish priests that were fighting against Christ and his disciples. One was love and one was, you got to keep all the law. Now, we can see the thread go all the way back through the Old Testament too, but we're not going to even talk about that today. Let's just start with the New Testament. Now, after the apostles died, they were martyred by very probably good-meaning people who said these Christians are going to destroy the world, trying to tell everybody to love one another. They're gonna destroy the whole world. We've created this government that keeps everything in check, and they're going to tear down our prisons, and all these bad people are going to run around and murder you. And they convince people by this. So there was a lot of good, well-meaning people. So that's kind of a good way to explain it all the way down to, say, 325 with Constantine. By that time, 300 years had gone by. People kind of got confused. The enemy, who we'll call it was the Babylonian Talmudic Jews, who didn't like Christ, who didn't want their power structure to go away. So they tried murdering people. That didn't work. It was like the blood of the martyrs was like seed, and they just grew. So then they decided, and they realized that they were going to have to infiltrate. So they took individuals like Constantine and Justinian and so forth, and they got them to enter into the church itself and create doctrines. And they could say, well, if nobody can come to an understanding, then we're going to force you guys to sit down and come to a determination about something esoteric and deep and spiritual. But since we don't understand the spiritual, we want you to come up with a legal doctrine. You won't know it or understand it spiritually, because the Trinity wasn't about three separate people that are all three the same God that are in one. And some mechanical explanation, like a mathematical problem. That's not what it was. And they lost that knowledge. The key that they lost is that Jesus was the Son of Man and the Son of Deity, because that's what man is. We are the son of deity. Adam was the son of God. And we have his nature within us. We're the temple of deity. And therefore, it's not saying that this one guy, Jesus, is the almighty deity that created all things out of nothing. First of all, they didn't understand how this divine being creates. They didn't understand the symbolism as how it was done by his word. And it's all there in the scriptures, but the esoteric understanding they couldn't grasp. So then they made it into these little confessions of faith and law. So then they decided that if you didn't believe in the Trinity, then you were a heretic, and they would off with your head. But the Trinity doesn't explain it spiritually. It doesn't explain that you are the divine being, that the divine is everywhere, and that Jesus was our elder brother. He was the Savior who came to tell us about this, that we were all one in Christ and one in deity, that the divine Father is in all, through all, and above all. They didn't understand that. So right away, they took people who didn't really know or understand the spiritual, didn't understand the deeper spiritual message. And because the world was illiterate and nobody knew anything, and the kings didn't know either, they just demanded that people have one belief. They wanted uniformity. They were blinded by their greed and evil, so they demanded people come to some agreement. So this is what happened, and then it came to what we have as Christianity. It's a bunch of doctrines and dogmas, and some follow Peter, and some follow Paul, and some follow this guy or that religion, or Luther, or Charles Russell, or whatever, and then some follow Christ. And even the ones that are following Christ didn't understand what Christ is, but they're just like, okay, I got to follow Christ. That's a doctrine, all right? But so once we get down maybe a few hundred more years, 2 or 3 more hundred years, 500, 600, you got Islam. It's basically the Dark Ages. People have just, it's a feudal system of war and hate. Now you're really screwed. But remember, the true teachings were already there and were being preserved by the night. Jesus chose John on the cross. John, there's your mother. Mother, there's your son. And he knighted John, says, take care of her. Notice that Peter was chosen by Jesus to be a rock, and upon that he would build his church. And they became the popes and so forth. But Jesus, as he was dying on the cross, entrusted his most precious things to another disciple, not Peter. It was entrusted to John. Remember, Peter and John are the two that are there in the last chapter of the book of John. And there's Peter and the one whom he loved, which is John. And Peter says, what about John? Because Jesus had told Peter he was going to die on a cross. And this is another thing that is a mystery that most people, I don't know if anybody's ever really understood, but what Jesus was telling Peter, specifically, he said, Peter, they're going to lead you in a way in which you do not want. And people have always said, well, that must mean lead him to the cross. Well, perhaps. To death, yes. It did represent he would die, because John, he said, wouldn't die until he came, or at least the priesthood of John. But he said, Peter, they're going to lead you, and they're going to bind you hand and foot and lead you. Well, I think that's literally the Christian church, the Catholic Church, run by these popes. They were led to a place they didn't want. There's nothing wrong with the church. Peter was the pope. He was a rock, and upon that rock, Christ built his church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. But only because of the fact that John would not die until Christ came. And John was chosen to protect the Holy Seed and the relics and the Holy Scriptures. If it weren't for that, the church itself couldn't be saved. But Peter's like, okay, what about this one? The one whom you love. And Jesus said, well, don't you never mind about him. You know, if he remains until I come, what's that to you? See, John, or that priesthood protecting the Holy Grail, must remain until Jesus returns, or else there wouldn't be anything left to save. He's got to preserve it. So we go to the Languedoc area, where Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of Jesus, and John and Lazarus and the 72 arrived in Marseille, France. There was a secret order of knights, or a priesthood, with a lineage back to Christ and Mary Magdalene. Well, that's been hidden by people today. The church don't know about it. They hid it from you. And we're going to show you that it's there. We're going to prove to you that that's the impetus for why we came to America. That's the impetus for why we have the Constitution. That's the impetus for the struggle, is to preserve. These knights are trying to preserve this truth. The Holy Textus Receptus, the Holy Grail, which means blood. The Holy Grail means the holy blood. So that the prince will be born, the servant of David, as it says in Ezekiel and Jeremiah and Hosea, that there would be a struggle for this period of time. There were prophecies that the devil would conquer the good guys and they would be martyred. I mean, Jesus said false prophets would come and false Christs, and not to believe them. And he predicted all of this would continue on for a long period of time. Because if Jesus was saying to his own disciples that, in about 10 years or maybe 30 years from now, the world's going to end, he wouldn't be telling them in some kind of parable all this long history, weaving together all the prophecies of Isaiah, Jeremiah, about, all these Psalms, talking about something was going to happen just in this one little generation. He was talking about a long struggle of man and the day of the Lord that would one day happen, when by the guidance of the Holy Spirit, we would achieve it. This is a problem with, I see people like Jacob, who may be very sincere, or others that believe that all the Old Testament prophets were all fulfilled in the days of Christ. Or before. I mean, the destruction of Babylon, that was fulfilled. The destruction of Assyria, Egypt, that destruction in Isaiah about Bozrah, the great sacrifice in Bozrah. And so if that was all fulfilled, and it was very symbolic, this colorful language, Babylon actually fell, then it was language that just was very normal. It was colorful language, but it just meant that we would have wars and famines, and then one day the kingdom of Christ would be established, which just means Christianity. And that's it. It's done. Preterism. But what they don't understand is that John did live 100 years later after the birth of Christ. And 100 years later was long after 70. And he's still talking about all these prophecies, weaving them all together from Isaiah and Psalms and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Hosea and every other place in the Bible, and Enoch. Because when those prophets spoke of Babylon falling, they weren't talking about Babylon. They were talking about mystery Babylon, Babylon the Great. They were talking about Babylon as a type for some future great event. And so the fact that Jerusalem was destroyed in 70 was fulfilled literally is not the fulfillment that Jesus is speaking of. The greater fulfillment, the greater Babylon, the greater Jerusalem, and the end of the world, and thy kingdom come. They are assuming that everything in the Old Testament was already fulfilled by 70. And none of it was fulfilled. It was only fulfilled in types and shadows. So because there's all this, reality that's being hidden, that people don't know, the world just goes off into all different groups. And there are wise men that sit down, and we're going to talk about a guy named Pico Mirandela, who was a man who was very confused, that some people may read in history as the founder or the source of these people like Rosicrucians. And if you believe that, then you're going to think, well, then all these guys were just speculating, including Bacon. The Rosicrucians were just speculating. But wait a minute, if they were just speculating, and if they were just philosophers, and we can't trust them either. We can't trust Lincoln was divinely trying to give us the truth. We can't trust that Washington was really a good person, that this is really the kingdom of deity. We can't trust the Constitution. We can't trust the motives of Abraham Jonas, who anointed Joseph Smith. And we're going to believe the narrative of the infiltrators who say Joseph Smith was a scoundrel and a thief and a money digger and a polygamist, which none of that is true. downright bald-faced lies. And anybody who wants to get into it and study it will find it's all lies. The testimony of all the people of that time says that Joseph Smith never did any of that. All of that was invented by Brigham Young and those groups to try and say, oh yeah, see, we could do evil because our prophet could do evil. So this justifies our polygamy and our lying and our cheating and the Danites and the murder. Oh yeah, and we'll twist this far west Missouri as, oh, a little place over there in Missouri. But it didn't happen, you see. We had to have Brigham Young to come and go to Utah. That's not, they're just twisting it. Missouri was a territory that went all the way to the Rocky Mountains. Joseph Smith was trying to go to the Rocky Mountains. But you see how all this, we've got to weed through all of it. So we'll get back to Pico Mirandela later, but what we got to talk about is the Kabbalah. Because remember, in the Languedoc was the true Gnostic. Cathars were Gnostics. And they had esoteric teachings. And it was the truth. It was preserved and handed down, the Holy Textus Receptus. But it's been wiped out, murdered, and stamped out. And we did videos about what, some of the things they tried to do to get rid of that lineage of Christ. But it finally went to Britain. And once they got to Britain, and they stamped it out there too. Right? Because Queen Anne died childless, and they snuck into Hanover. Vlad the Impaler, the Windsor line, which is King Charles over there. And so we're still waiting for the last overturning of that throne back to the true descendant of Christ. On schedule, just as the prophecies foretold. So, because there was the Languedoc, now let's take a look at Pisani and Teniers and Michelangelo and these painters. They would paint these paintings. I don't know if you've ever noticed some of these paintings of the 15th century and in the 16th and, the Renaissance period. There would be Mary, and she's always very, like even Da Vinci with the Mona Lisa and all this. There was always a picture of Mary. Why? Why were they infatuated with Mary? Were they just all a bunch of, was it just the thing to do? I mean, no, they were all involved in something. They had a secret. They were Rosicrucians. And they weren't allowed by papal decree to tell you straight up. So they had to be secret and gain some kind of foothold and get the message out, like printing the Bible in 1611 with King James, which was a cousin of the true line of Christ. And they had to take, and in these paintings, have Mary. And then if you notice at the bottom of the picture, there's always a skull in these paintings. You see the skull. Many of these esoteric paintings were painted with Mary and a skull. And that skull is, you've heard of the Skull and Bones? Well, that's the group, but it's been infiltrated by the Illuminati. And now it's a little group at Yale, and they make presidents, and they're flashing evil signs and upside down crosses, and they're evil. But the original Skull and Bones goes back to the severed head or the skull of John the Baptist. And that skull is always with Mary. Why? Because he's going to protect Mary in death or in life. He'll never leave her. And I guarantee that Mary's line will be preserved in all the things that are holy. The scriptures and all the paraphernalia and anything that the Lord wants to be preserved is going to be preserved by this priesthood. And this priesthood came down, and this was Washington, this was Abraham Jonas, this was Lincoln. They preserved the Constitution for us. This is the final battle. But who were the opposing side? Well, in modern times, we know it was Crowley and the CIA and the FBI and all this dark, evil, rock and roll, Satanism. Hollywood. Do you know that Holly was holy, right? It's a holy grove, and has to do with the Hollywood branch that they thought was a magic wand. And this Hollywood has become the world religion. They have a very exclusive group. Only the elite are allowed to go to their Grammys, to their awards, and to their big conventions. They have secret meetings, and only the very elite are allowed into that club. And they're all flashing the upside down crosses and all that stuff. But the world gets to watch on television. And they promote transgenderism, they promote immorality, and a liberalism that is designed not to say we can do whatever we want, like, true Christians are free in Christ, but a liberalism that says we can hate Jesus, we can kill one another, we can mutilate our children. The liberalism that is a freedom against truth. And they're promoting their religion over the entire world. The children are learning the rock and roll and throwing up the devil sign. And it's a worldwide religion. Look at Jehovah's Witnesses. They're in Brooklyn. They have their watchtowers and their symbols on the cover, and they're handing them out to everybody. They're one of these sects in the umbrella of this cult. And they have all kinds of different aspects to the cult to try and get in stealthily and sneakily into everybody's home. If you don't want to go straight for the Satanism, we'll teach you a brand of Christianity that denies Jesus. As long as you don't wake up and you keep going to the doctors and believe in our science and just trusting that everything will be fine and you don't rock any boats, that's what they want. So the opposing side, originally, we go back from Crowley back down through John Dee. We can show, we can prove, and I'll give you the facts in another video probably. All the historical facts that shows that John Dee was opposed to Francis Bacon. They lived in the same era. They actually met. But John Dee was 007, an agent that was of the devil, and got into the government of Great Britain. And remember, just years before that, they burned down the St. Paul's Cathedral and then changed it in some Vatican-style Renaissance like we talked about. So they're constantly trying to destroy the Christ line, the true British people, the real Druids and Celts. And not that people who are of Swedish bloodlines or Germanic bloodlines today are bad people. It's not even the German people at all. It's really this group that went to Bavaria and created a cult. Judaism is just a religion. Jews could become Christians, and good Christians can fall and become Judaizers. You could become sacred names. You could become Jehovah's Witnesses. You can fall. It's two ideologies. So the good side came from the Knights of St. John. They were murdered and assassinated, and they had to go underground. Then they were infiltrated. The bad side started with Kabbalah. Kabbalah was the Ashkenazi group that came to the area as they were, during the Inquisition, getting rid of the line of Mary Magdalene, the Plantagenet line, and they were wiping out the Waldensians. While they're doing that, these Ashkenazi Jewish people are coming in and creating this thing called Kabbalism. We can prove that Kabbalah was Jewish because it had Babylonian symbolisms, like Metatron. Metatron was spoken by the Babylonian Jews centuries before this Zohar or the Sefer Yetzirah was written. So we know that the stuff that's in Kabbalism there's no mention of Jesus in Kabbalism. It's an esoteric, mystical belief designed, created to counterfeit Christianity, to get people away from Christ. It's like Jehovah's Witnesses aren't really Christians. They don't believe in the Christ. They don't believe in the divine nature. They don't have the plan of salvation. They're still back with the laws of Moses and the principles of the law and excommunication and off with your head. Hate. They're not forgiving anyone. But they call themselves Christians. So here's a group of mystics, and people are like, oh, we don't know the difference. So, let's eradicate the good side, the Gnostics. So we don't even know about it for hundreds of years until we dig it up in 1947. We go, oh, look at this. The Christians were Gnostics. See, they got rid of that. And they supplanted it with this other mysticism, Kabbalism, which doesn't talk about Christ. And they have a completely different philosophy. And they teach about Metatron, which is interesting. It's like what the Kabbalah is the code for what they built AI. Remember we did that video just a couple of 3 weeks ago where we showed that AI was given to John Dee through this seance, and that it goes back to this Kabbalism, and it was the secret language of AI. It's their plot. It's the beast. So we know that they were talking long before the Inquisition of the Waldensians, long before Kabbalism ever got started or anybody knew anything about Kabbalism. They were talking about Metatron, and it was Babylonian Talmudic Jews that were talking about Metatron. They got it from Babylon. So we know then, remember the guy we just mentioned, Pico della Mirandola? He was trying to prove in about 1450 or something, but he was like one of these mystics trying to prove that Christianity or the Trinity is literally the same as Kabbalah, and they're just the same. But Bacon and the Rosicrucians didn't like that at all. And they didn't agree with that. But if you didn't know all this, you'd go back into history and you say, oh, well, it's all the same, right? It's just a different way of saying the Trinity in the Kabbalah. Metatron's just another word for Christ or something. But we know that Pico della Mirandola was trying to prove that the Christian Trinity was really Kabbalism, and he was an inspiration for some of the mysticism in the Renaissance era. But Bacon and the Rosicrucians had an older line of truth. They revered John. And all the painters, like we said, kept putting a skull in the paintings with Mary, definitely intimating that they had roots in John's line and his priesthood that had been commissioned to protect Mary and the Holy Grail or blood. And then we'll find out that, and these are the proofs, we'll find out that Francis Bacon talked about a Joabin in the New Atlantis and his efforts to colonize America and build the New Jerusalem. He talked about a Joabin, which is a reference to John Ben, a son of John. Joe is a shortened version of John. And I'm not making this up. This is what these Rosicrucians believed. When they called this individual Joabin, they mean that there was a lineage from John. It's a lineage that would protect not just Mary and the lineage of Mary, but all of the holy Textus Receptus and all of the relics that they were supposed to protect. So the skull and bones are obviously infiltrated by the Illuminati. We've done enough research already, and we've talked enough about this that I know you guys understand how that happened. But yeah, we're going to have to keep coming up with all the facts to make sure that what we're saying is correct. But this is where John Dee comes in. He is on the side that believes not in Christ, and on the side of people who turn the cross upside down or the pyramids upside down or flash the 666 like they do in Hollywood. He's on the side of Crowley, Anton LaVey, Satanism, rock and roll, rockets, like Jack Parsons and his rocket industry, and the NASA, the CIA, the NHS, the DARPA, which is part of the CIA, which then created Facebook and Google and gave all the satellites to Google to monitor us. It's a shadow government, and Elon's AI and Silicon Valley. So there's the division. The Rosicrucians, Bacon, Jonas, Smith, Lincoln, were assassinated by the infiltrated version, the KGC, the KKK, the Brigham Young, the Albert Pike, the bad side. We'll prove that there are two sides. And the Inquisition proves it. Because there were two sides. The pure line of Arthur, the Plantagenet line, the Bacon line, the Waldo, Peter Waldo, his two daughters, Eleanor of Aquitaine, Joanne Plantagenet, and Cadwallader of the Welsh line. We got the painters, the Bachs, the Beethovens. We've got the Pico Mirandola, who thought there was something between the two sides, that it was really the same side, but that was either an infiltration or a very confused man trying to figure things out. And we'll show that the Rosicrucians weren't fazed by it. But Babylonian Judaism was the plot from the beginning. It was to destroy the lineage of Christ. And Bacon did not align himself with the Pico Mirandola line or confusion. And we have to ask, is there really evidence that he and other Rosicrucians knew that Kabbalah was the enemy and then tried to counter it and defeat it? Because we've already established that Bacon and his Rosicrucian group distanced themselves from John Dee. They didn't like John Dee. And so if what I'm saying is true, the Kabbalah had to be created based on Judaism and a philosophy against Christ. And the original Skull and Bones, the Rosicrucians were esoteric Gnostics. And if we take this further, we see that there's this glaring opposition of the philosophies between the two groups. Not just that Christ and Metatron are opposite, but also in this dualism. There's an evil deity, Yahweh, creator of Judaism, law, control, vengeance, and a good and true and real and living deity, the deity of light, who's opposed to the darkness, illusion and darkness. Light is then good, darkness is bad. We will defeat the evil and have the glorious freedom of the sons of deity, as Paul says, which will be revealed. But the Illuminati teach that there's only one deity of good and evil. Notice how Christianity today has come to this thing where there's like, oh, there's only one God. Well, that comes from Judaism. We're all God. Elohim's plural. But they want you to believe there's one deity, and therefore any evil in the world comes from the one deity. He creates light and he creates darkness, Isaiah chapter 40, which is about Yahweh. He desires law, control over the peasants, over the Goyim. He wants slavery. He wants the Gentiles to be all enslaved, to be inferior. They're the chosen race. But see, we've got to know if this view that I'm giving you can be proven. Kabbalah is the source of John Dee. Is it really? Yes, we can prove it. The Illuminati is the source of Aleister Crowley. And the good side, Smith and Abraham Jonas and Abraham Lincoln and these individuals, Washington, all these good guys. These guys, a lot of them were murdered, but not before they could establish something, because they knew that something was coming, the last battle. And what did they establish? Well, they kept putting the symbols of the skull with Mary This is John the Baptist, the priesthood that would protect. They kept putting all the symbolisms, the Last Supper, the Mona Lisa. They put the symbolism in the flag, in the dawn's early light of the Rosicrucian symbolism. They created the Constitution. And we have to know that there is proof with this lens on the evidence that Pico Mirandola was either confused or just trying to make some sense out of a bunch of nonsense he couldn't make sense out of, or he's on the bad side trying to twist the two sides and confuse us. How do we synthesize all of history? Well, we have to look at the structure, the textual structure of historical markers, the Johannian apostolic line of light, Bacon, Rosicrucians, Jonas, Smith, Lincoln, and the Babylonian counterfeit, Dee, Crowley, Pike, Young, and modern technocracy. We can analyze it. We'll find out. And here's the verdict. Giovanni Pico della Mirandola was a tragic and he was a dangerously confused figure. Maybe he's well-intended, but in his well-intentioned ignorance, he may have accidentally handed tools to the counterfeit, to the enemy. Because Pico studied under Jewish scholars in Florence. He desperately wanted to prove that the Christian Trinity was some kind of hidden Jewish thing. And his teachers, knowing he had this immense wealth, because he was very, very wealthy, they sold him a massive collection of late medieval Kabbalistic texts, because he's like in the 15th century. But Giovanni Pico didn't have the textual training to realize that these books weren't ancient secrets from Moses. They were highly structured, esoteric adaptations of the Babylonian ideas that were written centuries after Christ by these Babylonian Talmudic Jews. So Pico published his 900 Theses in 1486. He tried to fuse the gospel with the Kabbalah. He claimed that these two traditions had the same origin, but he accidentally normalized this Babylonian system with the world at that time in this Renaissance period. Bacon and Newton did not follow him. They did study Pico's writings because of academic necessity at that time. Everybody had to do it. But Sir Francis Bacon explicitly did reject the synthesis that Pico made. And in his works, Bacon warned that trying to extract natural philosophy or Christian truth from the Kabbalah was like, quote, seeking the living among the dead. Bacon did not approve of Kabbalah. Bacon and the true Rosicrucian group, which was by their paintings and their symbolisms and their philosophy, we could prove goes back to the Knights of St. John and to Mary. They knew that the Kabbalah was a competing synthetic philosophy, and it was only designed to trap the mind, to abstract, to control, and not to liberate. Sir Francis Bacon wrote in the New Atlantis, which is what he called America. He inserted a character into it called Joabin, which we talked about. This was a symbol of John and the priesthood of John, the Knights of St. John that protected the order. If we look into John Dee and his Enochian sorcery, or Albert Pike's dogmas, they taught a monism. It was dark and light. It was Yahweh who created light and darkness. And they believed that the ultimate deity is a force of good and evil, order and chaos. Ordo ab chaos, which is what they've got on the dollar bill, which is the infiltration from the Illuminati. Because to them, the creator, Yahweh, or Metatron, is the deity of rigid laws, surveillance, and numbers, math, absolute control. They believe that humanity is inherently fractured and evil, and they believe that the Goyim has to be managed like cattle through some kind of a matrix of institutional control, prisons. This is the same modern network that we see from Aleister Crowley, Jack Parsons, down to the Silicon Valley and DARPA. Advanced intelligence, an obsession focused on digital surveillance, genetic manipulation, technological grids, which is this ultimate manifestation of this Babylonian Talmudic Jewish plot. To reject the true and living, breathing light of Christ with some kind of an artificial technological Metatron. Metatron, like electron, remember the movie Tron? It's to enforce global slavery. And we're going to have to wake up, guys. We're going to have to understand this. And that's why I'm doing these videos. If some of you can learn and understand what's really going on, I hope and pray that you will tell everybody. The world's got to know this. We've got very little time left. What am I talking into the vacuum of nothing? The infinite vacuum of nothing? Where nobody can hear me? Or maybe nobody cares. I thought the vacuum of nothing didn't exist. It's a vacuum, it's nothing. But evidently I was wrong, because we are experiencing it. Nobody hears me. Nobody cares. I wish there was one of you out there that could help me, that had some ability to get this information out to the world. I'm not interested in fame. I'm not interested in money. I just want this information to get out there. I want to save our brothers and sisters. My family. I'm a little selfish. I want to save my family. And you know who my real family is? Those who do the will of the Lord. But I believe that everybody's my brother and sister. And I just want to get this out to people so that they can, I cringe to think of what's going to happen to people very soon, because they do not know the truth. You're going to have to make a decision to join them or to oppose them, to get out of her. Joseph Smith was martyred by a compromised group of local lodge members that had been infiltrated by the Illuminati. They allowed Brigham Young to step in and then turn the whole movement to build the New Jerusalem that Joseph Smith was talking about. The Francis Baconian New Atlantis. And they turned it in some kind of a rigid kingdom of control and territorial financial interests and underground cities and the CIA and the FBI, government. Abraham Lincoln was also assassinated by John Wilkes Booth, who was a Knights of the Golden Circle, one of the elite pro-slavery occult network. It birthed the KKK and had ties to Albert Pike, which was the Scottish Rite Southern jurisdiction. They took over the Scottish Rite and took the 3 degrees, turned them into 33 degrees, and tried to get the whole world inside their initiation into Satan. They turned it upside down. But the good side, Bacon, Jonas, and Smith, and Lincoln encoded a blueprint of the kingdom with symbolic architecture inside of America, so we wouldn't forget. They created the text of the Constitution that would save us. Though it might be hanging by a thread, the saints will uphold the Constitution. And that's one thing I can guarantee you. The Constitution will never fail. They will not overthrow the Constitution. The prophets have declared it. It shall be done, and it is so. So they knew what the Kabbalah was. They go by it. And it's the foundation of the software of the AI, as we talked about. So, though the leaders of the light, like Bacon and Joseph Smith, were systematically murdered and their movements were infiltrated, like Brigham Young infiltrated Joseph Smith's work, but they left clues right there in plain sight. The true, uncorrupted Rosicrucian Johannian lineage was never entirely eradicated. It remains preserved in the landscape of this world that we have, just waiting for the Davidic servant to dismantle the counterfeit and heal the breach, and finally reveal the glorious freedom of the children of light. So, we're over an hour. We're going to have to leave it there, but we will get right back to you tomorrow. We'll start off where we left off. We'll tell you more details about this story because it's so important. I hope you'll share this video with as many as you can. And I hope you understand the Lord loves you all. His grace and His peace will always be with you. And we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good one.